welcome back to my channel. So this is my little platform where I turn struggling math students into maths masters. I post videos Tuesdays and Thursdays, so subscribe so that you can know when I'm actually posting videos. So in this video, this is going to be my first video on data handling, and I'm going to really just be explaining to you the process of data handling and what goes into it, and then look specifically at measures of central tendency and measures of dispersion. Okay, so let's jump right in. Okay, so let us jump into data handling. Okay, before I actually get into the specifics of data handling, I want to just have you understand that data handling has an entire process that goes with it. Okay, and once you understand the entire process, it's easier for you to do the calculations within that process. So let me quickly just jump into what the process of data handling actually is. Okay, so if we just look at the definition or the word data handling, it means that we are working with information, we are working with data. Okay, and what data we work on, what data we will work with, will depend on a question. So the data handling process will always start with a question. What am I trying to answer? Okay, so let's say, for example, I will use for this process, I will use the example of, let's say a school is interested in finding out how many of their students actually have their own personal study space. So they have their own desk in their own room. Okay, and in order, so that would be the question. So the question would be, how many students in our school per grade has a study space of their own? Okay, now why do we have a question? Because the question is going to drive what information we are going to collect. So we always start with a question, and then we will move to actually collecting the data. Now, in data handling process, collecting the data would include a survey or interviewing students. And in this case, we will interview students, or we will fill in a questionnaire or a survey where we can actually find out from students if they have their own personal study space. Okay, so that would be step 2. We will actually go and collect the data. Then the third step in data handling's process is organizing the data. So once we have received our surveys, we need to organize that. Okay, so how would we organize it? This is where your frequency table comes in. This is where your tally tables come in. Obviously, if I think about this, in this case, if I want to know per grade how many students have their own study place, I will then organize the data in, okay, this is grade 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And then also within each grade, I will say, okay, this is the students on the left side that have a study space, and this is the students on the right side that do not have study space. And that would be how you would organize data. Okay? Once you've organized the data, now we display the data. So displaying the data means putting it in all different types of graphical form. So this is where your teachers teach you about pie charts, bar graphs, all of that, ways to actually show. So if I just had to picture the specific section, I would obviously think, okay, I would envision a little bar graph or histogram where I show for each grade a bar that goes up until how many students in that specific grade actually have their own study space. Okay, so again, I'm just trying to explain to you the process of data handling. Once we have and display the data, we then now can interpret the data. Okay, so interpret the data, and this is where most of your calculations are going to come in. This is where we calculate our mean, our mode, the median, the range, the interquartile range. All of your calculations really occur in this phase. Okay, and the idea of this is to actually analyze and assess the data. Okay, so we will calculate what is the mean amount of students that has a study place of their own, etc. So this is the part, and I have two. This is a 2-part video, and the two videos are going to be surrounding this specific aspect of this process, interpreting the data. Once you have interpreted the data, you then can now answer the question. Okay, so the question will then say, the answer to this question would be, okay, there's X amount of students in our school that have their own study space. Okay, now this is obviously like a very condensed and a very summarized way of how this works in real life. Because let's say, for example, a country was interested in finding out how many people has actually been tested positive for COVID-19. They would follow the same process, right? They have this question, then they would collect the data, then from hospitals or wherever they can get that information, they'll organize it, display it, interpret it, and then the answer would be, okay, so many people actually had COVID. And a lot of these aspects, especially the display data aspect of this content, you'll know is what you will see like in the newspapers where they tell you, okay, this is a graph that explains, how the money is being distributed in the country, etc. So you get the gist of this. So this is pretty much the data handling process. And your questions in exams can come from various aspects of this. But once you understand how the whole process works, it's really easy for you to do the actual calculations. Okay, so now we're going to zoom in and look at the interpreting the data sort of section. Okay, now the interpreting data section, we'll have two subsections in this. It's measures of central tendency, and then we have measures of dispersion. And I just want to quickly explain the difference between the two. Measures of central tendency tells you the information around the center of the data. So in this case, it would be referring to your mean, the mode, and the median. Okay. Measure of dispersion now refers to how is the data spread out. Okay, how does it disperse? And that is then your range, your interquartile range, your box and whisker plots, and that section. Okay, so this video we're going to focus on sort of central tendencies and sort of on dispersion, and in the next video I'm going to look at the box and whisker plots. Okay, so let's quickly just get into this example. The first section I just want to show you, I'm pretty sure that you guys are very confident about these three sort of aspects, but I just wanted to go over this so that I can make sure that you guys are all clear on how to do this before we actually go to a more complex grade 12 section. Okay, so this example says, a survey was done on girls and boys to evaluate the number of hours they spend studying per week. Okay, so the girls, this is the amount of hours, 2, 3.5 hours, 4, and 8. So this is 4 girls, and 4 girls have answered this is the amount of time they spend studying in each per week. Then the boys, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 boys who gave us answers here. And they, this is all equal to the amount of hours they actually study for every week. Okay, so in this case, what we want to do is we want to calculate the mean, the mode, and the median for both the boys and the girls. So let's start with the mean. Now mean, another word for mean is average. Okay, the average. And how you calculate the average is you will always add up all the values and divide it by how many values are actually appear. So for girls, I'll add up these values and then divide it by 4 because that's how many girls there are. And that will give us 17.5 divided by 4. And our answer is 4.375 hours per week. Okay. The mean for the boys then exactly the same. We add it together, then divided by the amount of numbers we have, which in this case is 7. And divided by, so we say 47 divided by 7, and the average amount of hours that the boys study is 6.714. Okay, so that's how you do your average calculations. That's fairly simple. The mode now is again the value that appears the most. Okay, I always tell my students MO, the value that appears the most is the mode, because it's easy to get confused with all these M's and knowing what calculation to do when. Okay. So for mode now, we're going to look at which value appears the most. So if you look at the girls, you'll see that all of these values are different. So none of them appear more than once. So that means we have no mode. And this is how you would answer it in an exam as well. Okay, no mode. Then the next one you will see, okay, If I look at this data, you see that 2 is the one that appears the most. So our mode for this, for the boys, would then be 2. Simple, easy peasy. Okay, then we have the median. Now the median has got another name. It's also quartile 2. We'll get to quartiles a little bit later, but the median just means if I arrange my values in ascending order, what would my center value be? What would be the number that would be directly, perfectly in the middle? And in this case, if I look at these 4 numbers now, you will see that I've got 4 numbers. So it's going to be difficult for me to actually, there isn't one of these numbers that's actually the middle. So that means we're going to have to take these 2 values, right? The 2 middle values, add them together and divide it by 2. And then 3.75 then would then be your median. Okay, then for the boys, we again, remember, in this information, it's not in ascending order. So we first always have to put our values in ascending order before we find the center. And if I have a look at this now, you can see there's 3 values and there's 3 values on either side of the number 3. So 3 is our median. Okay, so this is how you do the calculation. But what's also important is that sometimes you have to be able to decipher which of these 3 will actually be the best to analyze what the middle value, what the central value actually is. Okay, so you will have to look at the data and look at the information and see, okay, let's say you look at the mode. So the mode is the value that appears most. But let's say the data ranges from 0 to 100. And you've got most of the values are ranging from 20 to 100, but your mode is like 21. Then obviously the mode is not reflective of what's more or less the central value. Okay, the same with the mean. Okay, so let's say we have a mean, but we have a huge outlier. Okay, and when we calculate using that huge outlier, then that answer may not necessarily be accurate towards the central value. So you must know how to calculate these, but you must also sort of know what of these 3 is actually the best to use within each given scenario. Okay, so that is just looking at how to do these calculations. But where do the examiners sort of make this a little bit more challenging? Okay, and the way I'm going to show you how they make this more challenging is through this example. So what they end up doing is, now obviously you have been calculating mean, mode, median, range since you were in grade 8. Okay, so when it comes to grade 12, very seldom are they going to just say calculate the mean. There's a good chance that they could, but very seldom do they like give it to you in such a simplistic way. But what they do rather choose to do is they will give you they will tell you what the mean or the mode or the median or the range is, and you have to calculate a missing value within that data set. So they've already done the calculation, but they are asking you to work back to find a value in the data set. So that's the next set of, this is the sort of the concept that I want to teach you how to do if this is how they ask the question. Okay, so let's have a look. The example says, a survey was done on girls and boys to evaluate the number of hours they spend studying per week. Again, same scenario, right? Girls, those amount of hours, boys, those amount of hours. Then it says, if the mean for the girls is 7 and the median for the boys is 4.25, calculate the value of A and B. Okay, so let me show you how you will do this. So firstly, calculating the mean. So we're going to start with the girls. To calculate the mean, right, it means you have to add all the values together and then divide it by how many values there are. So if I look here, I'm going to add these values together, right, which is all of these numbers added together will give me 45, right, plus the A, obviously, because we don't know what the A is, divided by how many values appear here, which is 7. And this answer, so 45 plus A, is the total added together, divided by the amount is equal to 7 over 1, and I'll tell you now why we put it over 1, but 7 over 1 is essentially 7. And it tells you that the mean is equal to 7. So that's where I got the 7. So they telling me that the answer is 7. I know that the calculation for the mean is this. Now, why did I put the 7 over 1? Because now we have to do a little bit of maths to calculate A. And I'm going to teach you sort of the most simplest way to do this. Okay? So the first thing you're going to do now is you are going to multiply numerators with denominator. Okay, so you're going to take the left side's denominator and multiply it by the right side's numerator. Then you are going to take the left side's numerator and multiply it by the right side's numerator. And these two answers you are going to make equal to each other. Okay, so this 45 plus A times 1 is 45 plus A. And this 7 times 7 is that 49. So this answer equals to that answer, right? Each arrow has an answer. Now we need to find out what A is. And if you look at this, it's easy for you to actually look at and say, okay, this is 4. However, if this wasn't as simple in an exam, all you needed to do was take this 45 over. And anything that you take over in the equal to sign, the opposite operation is what you must do. So I will say A is equal to 49 minus the 45. So the value for A is then 4. Okay. So that's how you will sort of find out how one of the missing values is equal to, if they give you an actual answer and you have to work back to actually find the value. Now let's look at the boys, because this calculation is a little bit different. Okay. So here they are talking about the median. So again, you are going to be arranging this, right? And they've already arranged this for you. So you know that where B is sitting now is what you need to actually calculate. So how do we do this? Now we know that the central values is B and 5. Okay, because there's 2 on this side and there's 2 on that. So B plus 5 divided by 2 is actually going to be the center value. And this is equal to the answer that is given here. And again, I put it over 1 because I want to do the exact same calculation as I did in the previous section. Okay, so let's look at that. So I'm going to say 2 times 4.25 and I'll go B plus 5 times 1. That then gives me 2 times 4.25 is equal to 8.5 is equal to B plus 5 multiplied by 1 equals to B plus 5. So this then, I take this 5 and remember I move it over because I want the B alone. So then that answer is 3.5. Now again, try and see if your answers actually make sense. So if I look at this now, I've got boys and here the answer is 3.5. So it makes sense. A is 4 and this is where the 4 would be, so this value makes sense. If you get answers like, 500 or 1,000 and it looks nothing like the data set, then obviously you have to look at, you've made a mistake somewhere. Okay, so not only must you know how to do the calculations, but have a look at if your answers actually make sense to the scenario that they're giving you. Now we're going to look at measures of dispersion. Now, like I explained a little earlier, dispersion means how is the data spread out, and this is your range and your quartiles. Okay, so let's have a look and see. So now in this case, I'm going to combine, I'm going to show you how to find a missing value, but at the same time also teach you the whole concept of dispersion. Right, so a survey was done on girls to evaluate the number of hours they spend studying per week. And here's the hours given. The range is 4.5. Calculate A. Now, range means the biggest number minus the smallest number. Okay? And then 2 says calculate the interquartile range. So the interquartile range is quartile 3 minus quartile 1. I will show you how to do that in a second. So let's have a look at the range. Now here you'll see they say, okay, the range is biggest number, which is A, minus smallest number, and the answer here is 4.5. Now what do you think you should do here? Same thing that you've done in the previous. You want to get, for previous questions, you want to get the variable on its own. So if I've got this, I'm going to move this then over to the side by changing the sign, and my answer is then 8. I look at my data, makes sense. Okay, so that's very simple. But now let's look at interquartile range. Now, what quartiles are is quartiles divides the data into 4, right? So if I had to take my data and divide it into 2, I would need to find the middle, right? That middle point is our quartile 2. So that means I've got a 1/2 and I've got another half. So the center of the first half, the number that is the center of the first half is my quartile 1, and the number that is the center of my second half is my quartile 3. Okay, so I then have the minimum value, then I have my quartile 1, I have my quartile 2, I have my quartile 3, and then I have my maximum value. Okay, so to calculate the interquartile range, it means I have to take quartile 3 and subtract it from quartile 1. So let's see how we do this. First thing you have to do is you have to put the values in ascending order. Okay, always. Whenever you're working with dispersion, your numbers have to be in order. Okay, so it starts by 3.5 and it works up its way to A now, right? Which we calculated was 8. Now we want to calculate the different, we want to calculate the interquartile range. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the center. Okay, so quartile 2 is, so I literally move from the edges and I move in and in until I can find the center value. So if I look at 5.7, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 values on the right of 5.7, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4 values on the left. So 5.7 is that middle point that I told you about. So that is quartile 2. Now, I need to find the middle of the first half. Now, please note, if this value has already been used, to find the middle of this first half, you do not include the quartile 2. Okay? If, however, your quartile 2 was 2 numbers, of which you had to divide by 2 to actually find the center, then you will use the 2 values, the value that's actually in the data set, when you are calculating your quartile 1s and your quartile 3s. Please play this part over and over for yourself until this makes sense to you, because this is very important. Okay, so in this case now, quartile 2 is 5.75. That is my center. So if I want to find the center of this, I can already see it's going to be between 4 and 5, because this has got 1 on this side and 1 on that side. So 4 and 5 would be the center. So quartile 1 is 4 plus 5, and then I divide it by 2 to find the center between these two values, and it's 4.5. I'm going to do the exact same now on the right side. I'm going to say 6, 6, 7, and 8. The center of that is 6 and 7. Divide by 2, and I get 6.5. Now I have my quartile 1, quartile 2, and quartile 3. To calculate my interquartile range, then I simply just take my quartile 3, which is the 6.5, and subtract my quartile 1, which is the 4.5, and my interquartile range now is 2. Okay, so that is how you will approach measure of dispersion. So remember at the start, I explained to you and I said, okay, we've got the whole process of data handling, and then when it comes to the process of interpreting data, that's where the calculations take place. So the calculations would be either measures of central tendency, which will be your mean, mode, and median, all around the central aspect of the data. Then you'll have measures of dispersion, which is your range and your interquartile ranges and your quartiles, which now explains to you how data is actually spread out. How the specific data is actually spread out. Okay, I hope that helped you, and I hope this sort of really helped you to actually understand this section a lot better, because it really isn't a difficult section. Alright, so I hope you found that video helpful. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or any recommendations for future videos, let me know. Just also a little sort of reminder to have a look at my video that explains what's happening in my channel. That will explain to you, about my revision lessons that I actually offer live. So if you're interested in that, go have a look at that video. Email me, let me know that you're interested so I can add you to our list. yeah, the class is filling up quickly. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.